Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone for coming, and welcome Neal back to campus. So to start us off, could you tell us a bit about your background and your training?
Sure.
And how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd like to start off by thanking Shobha and Maggie and Sumin for hosting me. It's been great to come back and see some old colleagues and some new ones. I grew up in a northwest suburb of Chicago. I attended junior college for 2 years and then transferred to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign, where I completed a BS degree. My degree no longer exists at that university. It was in cell and structural biology, so when they mean structure, they don't necessarily, it wasn't referring to crystal structures because that was literally becoming a bigger thing when I was, back in the day, when I was an undergraduate. I decided to stay on to complete a master's degree in microbiology. It was a slight career change, but really, it turned out to be a fantastic opportunity for me to kind of hone my research skills. So I started microbiology research my spring semester of my first semester at Illinois. So what would have been my junior year, second semester of my junior year there. I just really fell in love with laboratory work. I still wasn't quite convinced that the scientific career path was for me. It turned out then that after my master's, I applied for a research position, or a research technician position with a cancer tumor biologist named Jim Radosevich, who worked at Northwestern University in the otolaryngology department. I teched in his lab for about 2 years, but Jim's mentorship was really key because he was the one that really kind of fostered the idea of going and obtaining a PhD. So it was at that time that, so after a year in Jim's lab, I applied to a whole bunch of PhD programs, so University of Chicago, Emory, UIC, a couple others, and then of course University of Michigan. I obviously ended up here, where I was a graduate student in Matt Chapman's laboratory from 2004 to 2009. And then in 2009, I graduated and transitioned to my postdoctoral position in Eric Scar's lab at Vanderbilt University in Nashville. And so there was a couple crystallizing moments where I decided that on my postdoc lab. So the first one was, as you can tell by my career path, I was already a little bit older. So I did 2 years of a master's and 2 years of working as a technician. So I was already about 4 years older than a lot of my peers in grad school. And so while they went to the coasts, I decided I didn't want to be necessarily poor, so I wanted to stay someplace in the Midwest where my dollar went a little bit further. I would also say that the first time that I met my postdoctoral mentor, he was actually applying for a job at University of Michigan. So I was really fascinated with his work. And generally speaking, I really wanted to work with something that was a problem in the United States. And so at that moment, and this is maybe a cautionary tale, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus was a huge problem. And so that was really the organism that I wanted to work on. So then I was in Eric's lab from 2009 till 2015, where I matriculated at, down the road, East Lansing at Michigan State University.
So it sounds like you underwent a few transitions.
Sure.
So whether it be topic or maybe techniques. So could you talk about how hard or easy it is to transition like PhD to postdoc or postdoc to faculty?
Yeah, for sure. So I think a central theme in my career, other than a brief foray into cancer biology when I worked where was the focus of the work in the laboratory where I was a technician, has really been microbiology. So it hasn't been too big of a transition, I would say. I would say that probably a lot of folks in the audience have actually done maybe a bigger transition than what I have done from a topic standpoint. It's really about adapting to your environment, really, when you go to different labs. I'm sure that a lot of folks in the audience have probably also changed labs for various reasons, and it's really understanding the environment, understanding how the laboratory works, understanding what your expectations are from a general perspective, that really are going to help you succeed, hopefully succeed in the lab, right? I would say that probably picking the postdoctoral lab that I picked, I was very fortunate and made a lot of maybe uninformed decisions that kind of backed into really lucking out, so to speak. But really it's really just getting in the lab, answering questions that you're passionate about, and working really hard to answer those questions. And designing the best experiments to answer those questions are really what helps you transition into different stages of your career. The job from transferring from a postdoc to a principal investigator, I'd say, is probably the biggest leap, because there are times when I just don't feel qualified for the position that I have right now. So I stopped working at the bench probably, I would say last fall was really when I still have a little spot at my bench that, like, if I ever want to unretire from, I can retreat to, but I don't foresee that happening anytime in the near future. So really, it's going from your graduate career to your postdoc career, where you're at the bench, should be 24/7, right? Working at the bench, but then transitioning to essentially an office job and really stepping away from the bench and managing the lab. So in one sense, we're not really trained for the position that you eventually will have as a principal investigator. So it really is kind of a different transitional period. And there are definitely circumstances where you just aren't prepared. We don't have any formal training for some of the things that you encounter when you're a principal investigator. So it's really about adapting and trying to figure things out. I think also having a formal faculty mentor or mentor program has been really helpful for me at Michigan State, for sure, because you can always lean on those people and ask them questions, ask for their advice. And a lot of times you lean on your colleagues at wherever you are to kind of navigate the whatever current issue that you're having, for sure. Mm-hmm.
So I'll ask one more question and then we'll open it up to the floor. Probably a lot of graduate students can relate to this, but did you always know that you wanted to be in academia, or was there like a pivotal moment?
Yeah, I don't know if I chose academia or if academia chose me, to be honest. It's a fantastic career. Like, I was in Barcelona 2 weeks ago at a scientific meeting. Like, you have opportunities as a principal investigator, as someone that's in academia, that I don't think a lot of people have, right? I mean, you have a lot of freedom. It's not as much freedom as you think you have now, but you have a lot of freedom to study what you want to study. There's some limiting factors about that we can get into. But it's a great job. You interact with really intelligent people that think at very high levels. You're on the cusp of developing knowledge, right, which is really exciting. I think my curiosity is what drove me to academia, really, is, you wake up, you design an experiment to ask a specific question. You know the results of the experiment hopefully the next day. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but you're the first person in the world, probably, unless you have a lot of competitors, that know the answer to that question, right? And I think that's really exciting. That's the thing that really excites me about my job. Now, what's great is I get to train people to ask those questions, to train them how to perform the experiments and help them understand, okay, like, what's the best way to answer this question, right? And so I get to share in that discovery process, not necessarily be on the front lines like a lot of folks in the room, but like seeing and then watching the students develop is also very exciting, because you get to see them succeed, right? And that's something that not a lot of careers, I think, have, for sure.
Any questions?
I think this is one that doesn't get talked about a lot, but what are some of the setbacks that you face that you don't normally talk about?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it was phrased a little bit differently in the introductory list of questions. Like, have you ever, what was it? Do you ever think about giving up? something like that. Right? So the job isn't without its challenges, right? Any job that you pick is going to have obstacles and challenges. Those obviously differ depending on what job you have or what question you're trying to answer. I would say overall that I don't know if anything really unexpected has occurred. It's all kind of things that I probably could have anticipated in one degree or another. I will say that when I was, so I had a paper published in during my postdoc. It was my first postdoctoral paper. We submitted it to Cell. It got reviewed and subsequently rejected. So there's a little setback, a little bit of obstacles. It didn't go as high as I thought it was going to go, and so what that meant was that I wasn't going to be as competitive on the job market at that stage, right? And so I had to reassess and say like, okay, here's the situation. I can apply for this group of jobs here, and if I end up at those institutions, then those are the institutions that I'm supposed to be at, right? And then but it also motivated me too to really think about, okay, where's my science now? What questions can I ask? What experiments can I design to really up my game, right? And it turned out that I was really good friends with the people in my postdoctoral laboratory. We were very collegial, and there's one guy in particular that we were working really closely together on his project, and we were just bouncing ideas off of each other and came up with a project that ended up being in a Cell journal, not necessarily Cell, and that really was the paper that set up I think a lot of the interviews that I subsequently had. So sometimes things don't quite go your way, and so you just kind of have to adjust and reassess and figure it out. I mean, the great thing about science is like everybody in the room is the smart person in the room, right? And so you're more than capable of overcoming obstacles. So I don't think that anybody in this room is going to be faced with an obstacle that they can't overcome. It's just figuring out a creative way, or maybe just working just slightly a bit harder to push the deck into your favor. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the Cell journal papers that you have for the interviews, on average, like how many publications do postdocs need to be able to get interviews?
Yeah, so I don't know. Metrics in academic science are kind of like nailing jelly to the wall, right? And I'm seeing this in tenure now, where it's like, okay, what are the metrics for promotion? How many papers do I need? How much grant money do I need to bring in to obtain the next promotion? I would say as long as you have 2 first author papers and 1 that's in probably a journal at PNAS or higher, you're probably going to be able to be invited for interviews at most places that you interview, for sure. And I think the same thing is true. You could probably get away with 1 first author paper and a couple middle author papers for graduate students looking for postdocs, but for the postdoc labs, the really competitive ones, I think I have 2 pieces of advice. Probably want to shoot for 2 first author papers, although that's not exactly what I had. And then when you're looking at really competitive labs, you want to send out your letter at least a year in advance from when you're graduating. You want to, and that shows that this lab has been on your radar for a while, and you have a clear career path that you want to try to pursue. Because it's tricky when you shorten up that window and start sending out postdoc letters closer to when you're graduating, it might come off as desperation. So you just want to make sure that you plan as far in advance as you possibly can, right? And send out those letters sooner rather than later. Question?
So you said that in your PI position you have faced a lot of situations and tasks that you were not prepared for. So how do you cope with those?
Yeah. So the biggest one is mental health of the trainees. I think this is a big issue that we're looking at it from a societal standpoint. And I'm not a psychologist, right? So interpersonal relationships with people that struggle with mental health is really, I mean, that's probably the biggest one. And we see, so I interact with undergraduates too, so I teach introductory microbiology at MSU, and it's a big problem, right? It's a huge challenge to help folks figure out where they need to go. And that's a challenge in and of itself, and then you throw the mental health issue on top of it, and it's really, really, really challenging. The great thing about MSU, and I'm sure, Illinois I know for sure, and then Michigan, is there are departments, or there are mechanisms that you can help people go to where they need to go. So there's institutional support to help you deal with these issues. But
Discrete are you about the aims? So, sorry, I'm asking another question, but
so if I'm understanding your question correctly, you might be interviewing at a place where a competitor is.
Maybe.
Oh, that's tricky.
Likely, but maybe if you are giving out your aims, for instance, for a lab which is already set up, they have more access to resources as well as like people in the lab. So for them
So I guess so an overarching answer to your question is you should perform your science in an urgent manner, but I don't think you should be too freaked out about people stealing your science per se, because everybody's really busy, right? And so if they want to set up an entire new research program to scoop you or steal your science, I mean, it's really difficult to do that. And hopefully you'll be so far ahead of the game that that they won't have an opportunity to catch up. Now in those fields where it is slightly more competitive, I think it probably gets a little bit trickier. But wow, if you go to an institution and they start stealing stuff from your job talk, that's definitely not the place that you want to be. Right? So I was fully transparent. Like, here are my aims. Like, boom, boom, boom. We want to define, elucidate, quantify, whatever it was. I'm not trying to be not discreet. I just can't remember what they were. So, I don't. That's a tricky situation, though. I would assume then too that if you're going to a place where a competitor, that competitor is probably competing more with your advisor than necessarily with you. So that might be a discussion that you have with your PI too before you go on that interview, for sure. And they should hopefully help guide you to aims that might, be more discreet. Question?
And building off that, how much did you tailor your cover letter to the institution?
Yeah, it's more to the position, I think, than it was necessarily to the...
I mean, like the department, like the faculty in that department. Or...
Yeah, you definitely want to do background to know what they specialize in, and say, like, I'm a great fit for this department because we have overlapping interests in XYZ. I think that's a good thing that folks look at. Now, in full disclosure, I've never been on a faculty search committee, so I don't know, I'm probably not the best person to ask that. But if anybody in the room is going out on the job market soon, I would be more than happy to share my package with them. But you definitely want to put something in your letter that says that you are really interested in this job, and you are the best person for this job because, and they'll probably also give you hints in the job posting too about what they're looking for. And you can say, this is, the job posting says that you're really interested in antimicrobial resistance, and I work on a pathogen that is, notorious for becoming resistant to antimicrobials, something like that. Cool. We'll work over. How about you first, and then we'll.
Okay. So I'm really curious what the landscape looks like for these types of positions, because it's not like every institution is hiring for a position that you're specifically qualified for. So are there rumblings about the position that's going to open up and you start thinking about it, or do you just go on? Also, what are the time, do you think about it a year in advance?
Yep. All good questions. So the first the rumbling, you only hear rumblings if you have a good network. So you want to exploit your network and ask people who are in positions that you want to get to if their institutions are looking to hire, right? Because that's how you hear about the rumblings. So if you need to build a stronger network, the way you do that is go to meetings and meet people, right? Meet as many people, interact with as many people as you possibly can. The other way is to lean on the alums of whatever lab or institution that you're from, right? And so folks that are in more established labs have built-in networks than folks that are from newer labs, and that's just kind of the way that works. But hopefully, by the time you're a postdoc, you have a pretty good network to lean on, so you can hear about these jobs. So I started my job search off cycle, and what I mean by that is most of the jobs are starting to be posted now. So August, September. But there are institutions that will post jobs later in the year or the beginning of the next year, right? So I essentially started applying, I think, in October or November. So I missed like all the jobs that were the August, September postings, right? So I didn't go out with a full job cycle. And I had two interviews and 2 offers, or 1 offer, 2 interviews, 1 offer. And then, so one thing that you probably, and I should put a pin on this and come back to it, but it takes a while. Once you get an offer, it takes a while for things to truly matriculate, right? And so while that was happening, the full job cycle came in. So we were in like September, August period, right? So then I applied for all the jobs that came up in September and August. And so I came back on cycle, and then that's when my big paper hit, and then I started to get more interest, right? And so then when I came back on cycle, I had significantly more interviews and options at that point. So the point I wanted to get back to was, you don't want to underestimate how long it will take from even getting an offer or second interview and an offer to signing on the dotted line, right? And so I was not I didn't discriminate at all. Like I applied to every microbiology position that was open, right? Even if it was maybe slightly outside of the purview of what I specialize in. So I had, so when I was off cycle, I had 2 interviews. I think I had 8 interviews scheduled for when I went back on cycle. And I took 6 or 7 of those. And it's an exhausting proposition, right? Because you're traveling to different places. A lot of these places don't have direct flights, so you're taking multiple plane rides. I think the most connecting flights I had was 3, which is kind of crazy to think about, but so it's a long process. And what I underestimated was just having the stamina to finish off. And I think I probably could have negotiated slightly better if I had that if I knew that going in. But this would be a long process, and you'd have to, really stick it out. But that's something that I learned, and I think that, if you go into that with an attitude that, okay, this is going to be a long process, I'm going to need stamina, and you'll know that going in, so you should be better equipped to deal with that than I was, hopefully, right?
So I think you mentioned earlier that your broad interests were in microbiology, right? Mm-hmm. And then eventually you have to settle on something that your lab studies. So in your case, it's MRSA or Cephars. So when did you kind of settle down on something that you were more interested in?
So this is a great question because there's 2 points. So the one point is you want to make sure when you pick your postdoctoral mentor, you want to make sure that they have a history of placing people in faculty positions, and that they also have a history of cultivating research programs that their trainees take with them, right? Because you don't want to be competing with your postdoctoral mentor, probably because they are going to recruit 3 postdocs when you leave, and they're going to all be working on what you do, and you're going to be the best scientist in your lab for about a year and a half before everybody gets caught up, and this guy's got 3 postdocs. and is now publishing Cell Science and Nature papers on what you study, right? So you want to make sure that you cultivate a relationship, and you start off with a postdoctoral mentor that has demonstrated that they cultivate new principal investigators that have their own research programs in mind, right? And so that's a discussion that you have with whoever your mentor is. And there's negotiations involved, and then you just say, okay, this is what I'm going to take. And this goes back to having aims for your interview, right? Because if you're at your interview, if you're interacting with your postdoctoral mentor and practicing, right, I mean, they're going to know what your aims are, right? So they're going to know exactly what you want to study. And at that point, or hopefully before your practice interview, you've discussed, okay, here's how I envision my research program. Here are the aims that I'm interested in. You know, is there a conflict or not? So that's one. The second one is actually, so the second example is really cool because when you start interviewing at places, not every place is going to have the same facilities, right? And or the same foundational knowledge, right? So when I started at MSU, the biochemistry department hired 2 new faculty, and one of them was a metabolomics person, and she's excellent in what she does. And so we almost immediately started collaborating, and now I'm funded on something that I never envisioned I would even be working on. And so that's really exciting from the standpoint of you take what your knowledge and expertise are and mix them with other smart, high thinking individuals, and what comes out of that is something that's really exciting. So I did have a focus in the area, so it was generally metabolism that I was interested in, and my postdoctoral mentor knew that I was interested in it, so I could develop aims that put me on a path to lead an independent research group. But then when you arrive at whatever institution you're at, you're going to see the expertise that they have there. And so interacting with folks and doing really kind of cool high-end experiments can lead to new things to think about and new research avenues.
So your partner, how did that come into play when you were looking for?
I think this goes back to the negotiation and how I didn't really do a great job of negotiating. But no, that's a great question. So 2-body problem, I shouldn't call it a problem, right? It's only a problem when it becomes a problem, I guess. But, so the universities should be equipped to address that, right? So my wife happens to be in science. She's an exceptional scientist, and I probably could have done a much better job of negotiating a position for her, but MSU already had a principal investigator that was practically tailor-made for exactly what she wanted to do, and it's turned out to be a great fit. So, but there are other ways that you can go about addressing, helping your spouse find whatever they are. Now, that's true if they're more academically inclined, right? Like if they're an insurance person or a school teacher, it's going to be trickier to get them in. The university is not going to have as much pull as they will if they're looking for a job on campus, right? So I've been in a number of interactions with spousal hires. So like what'll happen is one department wants to hire somebody, they have a spouse that's so for example, like computer science wants to hire somebody, right? And then they have a spouse that's interested in microbiology. And so the spouse will come and they'll interview for a position in microbiology, and then we'll make decisions about whether or not this is somebody that we want to work with. And then the university has pots of money that can facilitate a starter package for that particular person. But it's really, it can be a challenge for sure. Right, but it really depends on what your partner is interested in, and that might also restrict the geographical areas where you can apply, right? So you just want to be transparent with them and make sure that they have the opportunities that they're looking for their career trajectory as well.
What do you pitch in for your spouse before the interview, after the interview?
That's a great question. So you're, it's tricky because the interviewers are not supposed to ask those types of questions formally, but eventually that information, you can give them that information, right? And then whatever they want to do with it, they can do with it, right? That information is also not supposed to hurt you as a candidate, right? So if there is a two-body issue, it might be even better to just like wait until you receive an invitation for a second interview to start talking about that. Because when you're interviewing, the interviewer is not supposed to ask those types of questions. Now some of them still do, like that's still happening. But you know, just be prepared for that type of question. And you know, I mean, every place is different too, so the types of, you can gauge whether or not you want to be at a particular institution based on your interactions with those people, right? And so if things kind of don't seem right, or they're not asking the questions, they're asking questions that you think are out of bounds, and that's not a place that you want to be, right? So.
Okay, and
Sure.
how many total applications did you make, and how many interviews were you called for?
Probably at least 17 or 18 applications. I applied for everything. I would check on the science jobs website every day, and I would apply, and I would figure out who was hiring. I mean, I applied everywhere. So it actually might have been close. It might have been over 20. I'm trying to think back to the little file I have on my computer. It was like job applications. So I had like 2 cycles, right? I think I probably applied to 8 jobs in my first cycle, maybe 15 jobs at least in the second cycle. And then I had, I want to say that I had probably, so I had the two off-cycle interviews, and then I had 8 interviews scheduled for the on-cycle one. And then I canceled my last 2 interviews because I was gonna make a decision. Well, maybe just 1 interview, because I was gonna make a decision before I went out to the last institution to give an interview. So, you know, I didn't want to waste anybody's time. Question?
Did you have a K award?
I did not. I applied for one. I probably should have been more. So I applied for one, and then for various reasons, it was scored. I received comments, and then I just decided not to reapply. I think one factor in that was like I was under the impression that I had timed out, but I think I probably could have negotiated with the program officer to give me another shot for resubmission. But I would highly recommend that you look into the K Awards for sure. If you come with your own money to a place that really can help you, it strengthens your application tremendously, right? Because it shows that you're already capable of receiving independent funding. So the type of K Award though that you apply to is dependent on the institution. So the NIH institute, right? So there's NIH, and then there's like NCI, National Cancer Institute, NIID, the Kidney, Lung and Blood, Eye Institute, and those institutions favor different K Awards. So you want to make sure that you're applying for the K Award that institution is most likely to sponsor. Does that make sense? And you can, that information, oh boy, I think you probably have to talk to the institutional SRO maybe, is probably the best way to find that information. You can also probably rely on your network too, to figure that out.
So you said you did over like 8 interviews more or less, and like this year you have like several projects. Did you go with like one main project to all of them? You have to like find new ideas, right?
Yeah. So what was the first part of your question?
So do you have to like one main project that you adapted as widely to
Okay.
different departments, or
Yeah.
do you have to find different projects according to the natures of each department?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I had 2 main research thrusts in my job applications. And so it was pretty clear that I was going to apply for grants focused on these two main ideas that I had. One was really underdeveloped, to be honest, and we weren't able to generate the preliminary data that I was comfortable with to submit, even at an R21 level. So having said that, you probably want something that's more developed, something that you probably have 1 or 2 figures of preliminary data for. And that'll be like your R21 proposal. And then you'll have your main one, which will be your R01 kind of level proposal. So, and I stress that because what happened to me was I applied to a lot of the private foundation grants. So Searle, Pew, Beckman, and those are highly competitive, right? So those are all no-goes, and I applied to those like every year for like 2 years. And then probably to the detriment of really being in lab, getting preliminary data for our 21 level grant, right? I know you're not supposed to have preliminary data for an R21, but so then I applied for an AHA, American Heart Association Award on January of my first year. And I just figured, this is a pretty good grant. I personally thought, I was like, I don't think this is going to get funded. But I'll get comments and I'll refurbish the grant and submit as an R1 in the fall. Well, it turns out that I got the grant. So now that's great. I have money. The problem is like now I have to come up with 3 more aims, right? And it took me probably a year and a half to develop 3 more aims. So all the while, like without R1 level funding, right? So that was a little stressful, but yeah, we worked it out. It worked out for us in the long run. But that's why I think it's really important to have, one grant that has might be a little slightly underdeveloped, but you have good preliminary data for. So for R21 kind of level funding, and then you have your solid 3 aims. I can submit this R01 level grant, no less than a year after starting my position. So you want to probably submit your first R01 at no later than your first year at your institution. So I was on pace for that until I was successful getting grant money, and then I was like, oh, now I need 3 more aims. So it's like one of those good problems, right? So, yeah.
So it sounds like, sorry.
Sure, yeah.
Sorry. Could you talk a little bit about transitioning to starting your own lab and some of the decisions that go into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had heard that it takes a while to get a modern molecular biology lab up and running. My lab came online really quickly. I think I had a group of exceptional undergraduates, so that really helped me basically unpack boxes, organize everything. Now the problem that I had with undergraduates early on was I recruited 7 to my lab. Because I figured they'll just help me clean up the lab, Granted, I will also say that Michigan State was exceptional for having my lab space pretty much ready to run. Depending on where you go, your lab space could be completely empty. More than likely it's going to be filled with stuff from before. So you have to go through all that, you have to sort it out, throw out stuff you don't want. That'll happen pretty rapidly for us. So then I'm ready to do experiments, and now I have 7 undergraduates that I need to train, right? That's a lot of work. So some of them kind of selected out, which worked out well for me in the long run. So I really took like the core 4 and was able to develop training programs for them. The other thing that really helped was, so I am 60% research, 30% teaching, 10% service, and I'm at a institution that will cover 9 months of my salary. So that's typical for institutions at the undergraduate level, right? Whereas medical centers are slightly different. I had in my package 1.5 year protected time, so I didn't teach for a full 1.5 years. So I didn't have any, so it was basically 100% research for that first 1.5 years. So I had a lot of time to train undergraduates, I was able to recruit a postdoc my first January on campus. and then also interact with the rotation students that came in with that first class. So getting a lab up and running is a big transition. And then I heard a really great piece of advice from one of my colleagues who heard it from his postdoctoral PI. And essentially it boils down to, you're the best scientist in your lab, right? When you start off, you're the best graduate student, you're the best postdoc, you're the best research technician. So what you have to do is you have to find people that you can work with and train to get them to the level, some sort of level where they can work on things while you're not, you know, over their shoulder watching them, because you have to buy stuff, you have to manage a lab, you have to write grants and maybe even write papers, right? So getting people in lab that are self-motivated, that are intelligent, that are organized, all kind of help out. So there are definitely characteristics. I didn't discriminate at all for the undergraduates I took. I just basically, I was kind of like in shock that anybody wanted to work in my lab to begin with. So I was like, yeah, sure, come on in. That's probably not the best approach to take. You probably want to be slightly more selective than that. And I'm still learning how to say no now. Like there'll be undergraduates that, but really in terms of personnel, one of the things that I'm learning is you want people that are self-motivated, because it can be really difficult to motivate. Some people just can't be motivated, right? And so, and you don't have time to motivate people, right? So they have to be motivated, and they have to have goals and aspirations of their own. That's pretty easy to figure out too, and when you talk with them one-on-one. Yeah, so that's probably getting the lab up and running functional, and then understanding the personnel that you work with best are probably the two biggest transitions and at the beginning, for sure. Questions?
How were you able to recruit your first postdoc?
Yeah, that was luck. So he was slightly geographically restricted. He was already on campus and wanted to stay in the area, and he's really good, so I just kind of snapped him up. But that's a challenge for new professors, right? Because why would a postdoc want to come work for somebody new if they have an opportunity to work with somebody established that is already putting people out in the jobs that they want? I think the other thing for my particular postdoc is he's really interested in going into mainly teaching. And so because of that, he's not really looking at the R1 institutions to run an independent research program. And I think he's more than capable of doing that, but this is, that's the career path that he wants. Good question.
It was really great information with the research aspect of it. How much did you have to prepare for the teaching aspect? And what did you have to show?
Yeah, so I'm kind of in this mass education situation now. So MSU, obviously, I think we have 40,000 undergraduates. I teach introductory microbiology, which has an enrollment of 500 students. I luckily split time with two other instructors, one of which is a professional academic, and then the other one runs their own research program too, so more similar to my position. So from that standpoint, the institution has been great from a support standpoint. The other thing too is like you'll learn as you start going on your interviews, if you're looking at these types of positions, they'll ask during your chalk talk, what types of classes would you be comfortable teaching, right? And so that'll be the first kind of foray into the classes that they'll want you to teach. And then as you negotiate your offer, you probably also want to pepper in protected time from teaching and also what classes you feel the most qualified and most comfortable teaching, right? Because you want to be able to teach something that you have a high level of expertise, because you don't want to start from square one with a curriculum, right? Because that's a lot of work. The other thing too is on your second interview, it might not be a bad, if you're applying to these undergraduate institutions, it's probably not a bad idea to identify people that are teaching classes that you might be interested in teaching, just to see what do they do, how do they prepare for a class. So I was extraordinarily fortunate to inherit a large amount of material and slides from people that have taught the class before me. So there was already a lot of sweat equity built up into the curriculum. And so really, I just kind of came in and took what they had and then kind of just gave my own flavor, added my own flavor to it. And that's sort of what my philosophy has been. My role in the class is increasing, so I was responsible for essentially 14 lectures worth of pathogenesis and epidemiology, and that role is going to expand just because due to turnover in some of the support. And so I think that I'm going to take a much larger role in the class, which I'm going to have to start preparing my lectures here soon, fairly soon, right? So in the fall, so full semester ahead. But you do not want to underestimate how much time it takes to prepare for those types of classes, for sure. But again, it depends on how much support you have from your institutions and how much support you have from your colleagues too, because they probably have a lot of resources. And I'll say that that's something that MSU is just exceptional on, is they know that, their number one mission is generating leaders for the next generation. And so undergraduate development is a huge mission of the university. And so there are resources in place to help us do that.
So, you said 10% service on your position? What does that include?
Oh, service, yeah. So that's so serving on committees is a big one. So faculty search committees. Yeah, I forgot. You guys probably don't know much about service yet, right? So serving on committees is a big one. So faculty search committees, curriculum committees, review committees. So this might be a conversation that you also want to have with your PI about how they fulfill their service requirements, right? Because this is a key point. I will say for women and underrepresented minorities, this is going to be critical for your career, because every committee wants to be representative and diverse. So if you're a woman or underrepresented minority, you are going to be recruited to a large number of committees. But you should only be working on 10%. 10% of your time should be dedicated to service. So it's going to be tricky, but you want to learn how to say no. Because otherwise you're going to be on all these committees and not have time to do your own research, right? And so when I look at some of my female colleagues, they're on an extraordinary number of committees. It's just like, it takes up a lot of the time. And so you definitely want to be able to either negotiate some kind of level of service number, committee numbers or something in your offer letter, or just kind of learn how to say no, right? Like say like, I'm on this 3 committees, right? Is there any way I can take a break and not on be this committee? The art of saying no is something that I'm trying to learn too, because, so for example, I wasn't asked to review a manuscript for probably about 4 months. And then 2 weeks ago, I got a letter. I was like, okay, I'm not reviewing anything, I'll accept it, right? So every time you accept something, that takes up time from some other opportunity that might come along. And sure enough, 3 days later, I got asked to review another paper that I should probably review because I'm more of an expert on this particular manuscript than on the other one. So of course I accepted that one. And then a week later, I got another one. So it's just, you don't have it probably seems like you have an unlimited bucket of time being a postdoc and graduate student. But I don't know if the bucket gets smaller or the water that goes into the bucket is a whole lot more, but it just gets smaller, right? And so you just have to be really judicious about what you choose to do with your time. And for women and URMs, definitely committee service, learning how to say no in professional ways, I think is important.
All right, I think that's all we have time for today. Let's thank Neal again.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That was great. Appreciate it. Thank you for having me.